In 1989, video games were thriving and the side-scrolling platformer was king. As Mario introduced players to the simple joy of running and jumping through side-scrolling levels, another game would build on that foundation and change everything after. Prince of Persia, released initially for PC, is often referred to as the first cinematic platformer, offering a unique blend of fluid animation and smart game design. You play as the young love of the princess who's being held captive by the evil vizier Jafar. 1 hour is given to decide if she'll marry Jafar or meet her fate, and you must escape the depths of the dungeon you find yourself in, defeat Jafar, and save the princess before it's too late. This is more easily said than done because unlike most 2D games at the time that were all about momentum-based platforming, Prince of Persia was about precision. Players could climb up onto platforms and would need to parse smaller steps with large leaps to avoid traps and activate switches. It was all about tactile puzzle solving and feeling the danger and thrill of your adventure. Chaining movements together was absolutely key and felt really satisfying when done correctly. Combat was also a standout, feeling more like a proper duel than your run-of-the-mill button masher from the era. The game's unique animation style was brought to life through rotoscoping, which lended the overall presentation a real charm and authenticity which few games could match, and it drew a lot of praise from critics and players alike. Drawing inspiration from Arabian Nights literature and big-budget movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Adventures of Robin Hood, the game had all the ingredients of an instant classic. And speaking on Robin Hood and rotoscoping, Seoul game designer Jordan Mechner famously said this of his method for creating the game's swashbuckling sword fights. For a few seconds, the camera angle has them in exact profile. This was a godsend. I did my VHS 1-hour photo rotoscope procedure, spread 24 snapshots out on the floor of the office, and spent days poring over them trying to figure out what exactly was going on in that duel, how to conceptualize it into a repeatable pattern. So cool to see the lengths one man went to bring his vision to life. And that vision would pay off as Prince of Persia would of course find success and was later ported to lots of different platforms, with the SNES in particular getting a wonderful version that still looks and sounds excellent today. An official sequel, Prince of Persia 2: The Shadow and the Flame, would follow in 1993 for PC, and of course also come later to other platforms. And this one manages to impress even more, throwing you into action right out of the gate, with the overall presentation getting a really nice and colorful upgrade. Both of these games are held in high regard, and for good reason. Prince of Persia's influence would be felt for years, with games like Another World and Flashback pushing the genre even further, and that influence would even reach into 3D. By 1999, many 2D icons had made the big jump to 3D. The Prince would follow suit with Mindscape's Prince of Persia 3D released for PC, and then later released as Prince of Persia Arabian Nights for the Sega Dreamcast. Original creator Jordan Mechner would consult on the project, but mostly let Mindscape take the reins. This is a 3D action-adventure game that plays a lot like Tomb Raider, which ironically plays a lot like the original Prince of Persia in 3D. The way Lara Croft requires precision input to jump, climb, and meticulously make her way through dungeon-like levels calls back to the original cinematic platformer, but evolves those core mechanics for 3D. Here, Prince of Persia 3D does much the same, and it does so well. I like the medieval Persian setting, and the graphics and gameplay are solid. It's one I've been really enjoying going back to check out since it mostly flew under the radar for a lot of gamers back in the day. And this makes sense since the game began development in 1997, and by 1999 the world had already gotten 4 Tomb Raider games and is similarly playing Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, so it wasn't remembered quite as well. Not to mention Mario 64 and 96 redefining movement in 3D games. But just like Mario making one of the most impressive leaps to 3D, the Prince would return again, and this time, he would change everything.
We'd all take more risks if we could control time. Rewind time. Freeze time. Controlling time is the ultimate power.
2003's Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is a reboot of the original series with development duty being taken over by Ubisoft. Series creator Jordan Mechner would return, this time taking a much more hands-on approach as creative consultant, and the result would be one of the most memorable games of its generation. Right away you'll notice the art style and animation looks incredible. In keeping with the legacy from the classic games, the team here went above and beyond to bring something special to the players. And while it's not cel-shaded, the art style evokes a similar feel for me, especially played on a CRT, to something like a Disney or DreamWorks animation classic. Not in a way that feels wholly derivative, more so in a way that feels similarly timeless. It's a mix of excellent graphics geared toward an elevated sense of realism, with an incredible depth of animation. The world just feels colorful, alive, and fully realized, whereas follow-ups in the series went after that edgy early 2000s vibe. Sands of Time is aged like fine wine as opposed to 2004 Mountain Dew. Much like the DOS adventures the original shared space with, this reboot keeps in line with that colorful spirit and sense of grand adventure. When it comes to gameplay, Sands of Time blends ideas from the original games with brand new mechanics that would go on to inspire all of game design going forward. Just like in the originals where you go from screen to screen navigating different rooms, puzzles, and traps, Sands of Time parses out its levels similarly. Here you work through segmented areas before reaching your next save point, pushing forward in the overall narrative and on the journey of redemption you find yourself on. It's all about methodical movements, premonitions, and puzzle solving. And speaking of moves, the team here made sure the Prince would have everything he'd need.
We played a lot around with the idea of Persian ninja, acrobatic stuff. Basically, we came up with a character dreamt with a full range of movesets.
Your entire range of motion has been expanded from previous games, with a strong focus on acrobatics and larger-than-life abilities. One of those abilities, of course, was the wall run. Anyone who played video games in this era remembers the first time they saw this in action. As the Prince defies gravity, running with such cunning as to almost cling to the walls themselves, players could experience a whole new sense of movement. Being equal parts swashbuckling sword fighter and Jackie Chan, this Prince of Persia did indeed help popularize parkour in games. But unlike so many later games that would tack on the wall run as a gameplay gimmick to pad out their game design, Sands of Time made it integral, awe-inspiring, and oh so cool. Watching the cloth from an adorning banner sway as you brush by with those cinematic fixed camera changes practically felt like a rite of passage for early 2000s gamers. It was like you were lifting off from the constraints of older generations and taking off into gaming's future. I really love how the elevated sense of realism plays into the narrative and the gameplay.
We exaggerated the proportions of the tower on the rooms to create a more immersive and spooky universe. The Prince can interact with almost everything, so we had to justify the level design artistically.
The crumbling palace and ruins, the eccentric traps you're coerced into activating all have a reason for being, and it shows a care and thoughtfulness behind the team's designs. It all plays nicely within the story they're telling with the mechanics you're given to experience it. The fluidity, the animation, the graphics, it all just had that unmistakable magic you get every few generations from a team looking to push boundaries with a clear vision and drive to create something new. It's fantasy and fairy tale meets early 2000s action, and it's all just delightful. And in keeping with that 2002 aesthetic, you could of course manipulate time itself. As the Matrix led to Max Payne, slowing time at the press of a button became a big deal in games, and then Ubisoft's Sands of Time took things a step further. With the Dagger of Time at your disposal, you could slow time to give yourself a leg up on timed events, or decelerate the onslaught of combat. Certain areas have you turning on a trial of traps that also activate a door that will begin to slowly close, and having this ability can come in handy here. Where they really expanded on the idea of holding power over time though was with the rewind. Holding a button allows you to rewind the flow of time up to a certain point, giving players essentially a limited number of redos. This was great for taking a better stab at a bad leap or completely changing the tide of combat. Where so much gameplay relied on precision movements, this was a great addition that blew people away at the time, and it just looked cool. Where this could have been just a fun gimmick, the team found a clever way to weave the mechanic into gameplay, as you can only rewind when you have enough sand in the dagger's tank. You collect sand by defeating enemies or by finding clouds along the way. Sand tanks power special moves or can rewind time, and choosing when to use what in combat can determine the outcome. Especially in later levels where fights get more intense. I'm sure you could beat the game without ever using your powers, but having them there gives you options, and that makes for a more fun and playful experience overall. So the game looked great, played great, and had plenty of flourishes, like in its lighting. I love the way light pours in softly from the palace windows, or the orange glow of enemies lighting a battle at night. The way torchlight spills up onto your character as you walk a tightrope in a dark room, or the caustics of water dancing across the palace walls. It all just had that grand fantasy adventure feel, and by the end you'll feel like you've been on a real journey. Little additions add to this, like how your outfit changes over time, reflecting all the trials you faced in the hours spent battling your way up the tower. The way day turns to night and night back to day lends a real sense of time and tribulation to your story of redemption. Like the prince and princess have been at this non-stop for days, trying to undo the horrors you've unwittingly wrought. The sands of time reaches some real heights, and you could feel it toward the end. When you're closing in on the top of the twisted tower and it's just you and the twilight sun, making huge leaps into the atmosphere to make your way back to the hourglass, you feel it. The sense of dread and adventure being up in the clouds with only your will to keep going pushing you onward and out of the depths. I love the pacing in general and how each new beat feels earned. I like how your relationship with Farah changes over time, even though you are directly responsible for obliterating everything in her world. By the end, your young arrogance turns to selfless action, and the story wraps up in a beautiful way. The whole experience just has weight to it, and it stays with you when you're done. All in all, the team behind Prince of Persia managed to make something that really stood the test of time. Following in the footsteps of the original cinematic platformer, they crafted one of the best ever made. They did such a good job creating a Disney-like classic that Disney themselves had to come knocking and actually make a live-action Prince of Persia in 2010. As for the best way to experience Sands of Time, if you're playing on console on a modern TV, I'd recommend playing the original Xbox version via backwards compatibility like I'm doing here on Xbox 360. There is a bit of slowdown on the 360, but you get a nice upscale that still has some of the softer analog characteristics I think fits the art style really well. I'd recommend the GameCube version if you're playing on a CRT, with your best bet today probably being just playing on PC if you want to bump up performance and resolution and all of that. There is of course the HD trilogy on PS3 that should be great, and looks great, if not a bit over sharp, but has very broken audio due to a surround sound bug that makes the game sound like it's being yelled through a tin can. People say you can fix this by turning off any 5.1 options in your PS3 system settings and turning on multi-channel out, but it didn't do much for me. Prince of Persia would go on to be rebooted 2 more times with 2008's action-heavy Prince of Persia and 2024's Metroid-like platformer, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, which is an excellent return to form for the series. Much like Mario 64, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time took an original game changer and broke the mold again, creating something so cohesive and innovative it defined its generation and would go on to inspire others. It remains a timeless treasure today, more so than its sequels in the way it honors its DOS adventure roots with beautiful art and animation that feels like a cinematic classic. The game would go on to become so beloved, a remaster is forthcoming. And no matter how that turns out, this original, while all about a prince and a princess, still plays like a king.
king and his son have defeated a mighty empire, inheriting an extravagant hourglass and a mysterious dagger that contain the mystical powers of the sands of time.
Inside the hourglass is a marvel that no living man has seen. Only the dagger can unlock the sands of time, and it belongs to a greater one than I.
But when the prince is tricked into releasing an ancient and evil curse,
You have unleashed the sands of time. I can undo what you have done. Give me the dagger.
he'll have to put his faith in a woman he has no reason to trust.
My father's army sacked your palace, captured you as a slave. You have every reason to hate me. Now you want me to trust you.
Go on! There's no